Right, hello everyone, welcome to the session. It's called Electrolysers, the key to unlocking green hydrogen. I'm Lee Collins, I'm the hydrogen editor at Recharge, which is a global publication covering renewables and the wider energy transition. And we have a growing focus on hydrogen. Hopefully you've read some of our stuff. We just hired a new full-time hydrogen reporter over there. We also have a free weekly hydrogen newsletter, which I highly recommend. You can subscribe for free. So in this session, we're going to be discussing electrolysers from several perspectives: the policies needed to kickstart the industry, the challenges of scaling up manufacturing, where the future demand is coming from, and also the pros and cons of the different types of electrolyser technology. And we may also discuss the European Commission's new Repower EU plan, which was released about 3 hours ago, less than 3 hours ago. So, let me introduce our expert panel. On the end, we have Dennis Kruder, CEO of electrolyser maker ThyssenKrupp nucera, which I believe is aiming for a manufacturing capacity of 5 gigawatts by 2025. Or have you increased that yet? And then we have Constantine Levoyanis, Head of EU Affairs at Electrolyser Now, which aims to build 10 gigawatts of production capacity by 2025. And who else have we got? We got Dr. Min Lee. He looks about 22, but he's much older. He's Head of Hydrogen Research at Norwegian analyst Rystad Energy. And next to him, we have Marta Lovisolo, Policy Advisor at Norwegian NGO Bellona Europa. And finally, we have Daniel Freil. He's Chief Policy Officer at Trade Association Hydrogen Europe. We're going to start things off with a short market overview from Min. Then we're going to have a 40-minute panel discussion and finish things off with questions from the audience. So if anyone would like to think of questions, please do. Okay, Min?
Thank you very much, Lee, and thank you for all the panelists for joining me today, and thank you for the audience as well. So just have a couple of quick slides, I guess, to put it in perspective of how we're seeing the market actually is and where it is at now. Also, Lee told me that we shouldn't introduce too long for the company, so I'll just more introduce on how we want to do our research and how we're actually doing our research. So for those of you that don't know, Rystad Energy is an energy knowledge how we look into market analysis, business intelligence, and consultancy in the energy sphere. Of course, to have an overall view of this, you need to understand every aspect of energy, including on the upstream oil and gas, also renewable, solar, wind, power plants, and of course now with hydrogen as what we consider an intermediate between these primary energy and final demand centers. So here's just example of how we can take all this data up and kind of add them up to see what market is doing, what its project actually will come up in the next, let's say, 5 to 10 years. So in terms of how this hydrogen come about, we look at it in a perspective of both decarbonization as well as the intermediates to, let's say, conform to certain degree scenarios. And when we look at the pipeline that has been announced so far, of course, everyone knows massive capacity has been announced for green hydrogen, also a little bit for blue hydrogen and other aspects as well. Australia is really standing at the top here with a lot of major gigawatts facility around the countries. Following that, we have UK and US, a bit more blue. And then following that, you have, of course, Mauritania, Egypt, with a lot of plans coming up a bit later on. So those are kind of, let's say, new countries to come in. But let's talk about what actually we think can come up by 2030. So, of course, let's say if we take away from the blue for a second, with blue, about 7 million tons of hydrogen. Without blue, we're sitting for Europe in 2030, about 3 million tons of hydrogen. So now we put that into perspective of the Repower EU wanting to make about 10 million tons domestically. We short about 7 million tons. And then, coming into the perspective of importing 10 million tons whereas that 10 million tons will come from, when we add up all the green hydrogen production, that could come up by 2030 in other countries, only add up about 8 million tons, so we're still 2 million short. So if everything funnel into Europe, we're still a bit short. So I guess the way or the question is, all these gigawatt facility, can they come in a bit earlier to kind of come up before 2030? Will there be more announced projects to come up to kind of meet this demand of Europe? And yeah, that's basically the overview I want to give. I'll sit back down.
Blimey, that was quick. Okay, just to put things into perspective, are you able to say how much electrolyzer capacity exists today and how much and what the installed capacity is today?
Yeah, so let's just count the utility scale projects of above 1 megawatts. Then we're sitting just a little bit under 1 gigawatts. So in order for this pipeline to come up into 2030, we're expecting about 40 gigawatts to be installed in Europe to make up these 3.5 million tons, because of course, not these electrolyzers are not going to be able to produce 100% of the time. So that's sort of the number that we're looking at for Europe.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Right, Marta, let me come to you first. We're going to talk about policy. I just wondered if you wanted to speak a little about the Repower EU, which came out a few hours ago.
Yeah, it came out, almost all of it. So for whoever is not following closely the European policy development, today this Repower EU package was published that it's supposed to guide Europe away from Russian gas dependency. And one important part of this policy package was the Delegated Act of Renewable Fuels of Non-Biological Origin. So this Delegated Act contains the definition of what Europe considers as green hydrogen. This Delegated Act was supposed to come out by the end of 2021. We've seen a lot of announcement and a lot of delays. Today it was announced again, and it didn't come out again. All across Repower EU, many different policy files, there's mentions of green hydrogen, a lot of quantities, a lot of targets, but yet today we have absolutely no idea what does it mean in practice to produce green hydrogen in Europe. So yeah, I think that's my main take of these Repower EU files. We see increased targets for hydrogen, 10 million tons in Europe, plus additional 5, plus another additional 10 imported. It's a lot of hydrogen. And if we do not define where the electricity to run these electrolyzers come from, we risk actually producing this hydrogen on grid electricity, on gas-fired electricity. And we can fool ourselves this hydrogen is green, but if it's not produced with renewables, additional renewables deployed on the grid to be able to power these electrolyzers, in the end, we are setting very high standards. We look at very interesting goals, but we're just greenwashing yet one other industry and not deploying the future that we want.
But one of the things that Repower EU has come out with is carbon contracts for difference, which is basically a subsidy scheme to enable it to compete on costs. Do you think that will be enough to get the orders flowing at the scale we need?
Yeah, I think subsidies will come from many different points. Once we have regulatory certainty, once we know what is expected in terms of green hydrogen production and capacity scale up. There's targets everywhere. The proposal of the Renewable Energy Directive sees a 50% switch from gray hydrogen to green hydrogen, potentially moved up to 75% by 2030. There is a target, 2.6% for energy use in transport coming from hydrogen. These targets will end up by naturally becoming subsidies to be able to deliver on the targets. These targets are binding, countries will want to deliver, subsidies will come in the form of contract for difference, in other formats, it probably depends, it probably will vary a bit country by country. But until we do not have regulatory certainty, countries themselves do not really know how to act.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that came out in the Repower EU thing was that there would be a full switch from grey hydrogen to green hydrogen. I mean, that seems quite significant to me. So I just sort of bring in Daniel. Yeah. Daniel, do you have any? Or?
I mean, a full switch is also, again, the devil is in the details.
Right.
Because the industry, there's one part of the demand for hydrogen in the industry that can be substituted today. It's like merchant hydrogen, gray, blue, green, pink, violet. They just put hydrogen into their processes, they can change it. And that's 1 million tons in Europe. Then there's another 3 million tons that's used for ammonia production. It's produced on-site with SMR technologies. It's fairly easy to switch. You have to switch off one part of your value chain, part of your processes, but you can bring in hydrogen. Yeah. And then the rest, the bigger part, for over 4 million tons in Europe, hydrogen there, it's a byproduct of other processes. So you can bring in there green hydrogen on paper, but what are you doing with the byproduct that you have anyway? And that's the hard part. That bigger part of the industry needs to change completely. So when we talk about full switch, are we talking about full switch of the part that is easily switchable, so the 4 million tons, or are we talking about full switch, including refineries and those parts of the chemical industry that actually have hydrogen as a byproduct?
We're kind of getting away from electrolysers a bit, so let me just steer the conversation back to electrolysers. Daniel, do you want to give your reaction to the Repower EU?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the invitation, by the way. No, I very much agree with what has been said on the Repower EU, probably just to emphasize other elements. I mean, we should not underestimate the power of the political leadership here. They are now again saying we need to increase our ambition of renewable energy to 45%. And then it goes along with these targets for renewable hydrogen in different sectors, as it has been well explained. And then there is a lot of more things. I mean, they are bringing up also regulatory changes for accelerating the permitting of wind and solar. So this is probably the most important element here, because we discuss hydrogen, we had the hydrogen session, but we heard a million times, you have no renewable assets, you cannot produce renewable hydrogen. So that's the core part, and they are making a real legislative change, or they're trying to bring that. So that will deliver a lot of impact. There is plenty of other good things on this communication. They are staffing up their innovation fund. They are also looking to provide more money for infrastructure projects as part of the 10E, or the Clean Connecting Europe facility. There are all these international aspects on creating partnership with different countries around the world. So it's really good. As a colleague has said, there is no definition of renewable hydrogen, and this is basically exacerbating already the big problem of uncertainty, and the industry is really fed up of waiting and modeling and waiting and delaying their FIDs all over. So we're hoping that this will come tomorrow or in the next couple of days.
Yeah, next couple of days, yeah. As part of the Repower EU, it says that they want to import 10 million tons of green hydrogen and make 10 million tons within Europe. I mean, that, just on paper, is going to take 200 gigawatts of electrolysers. I mean, do you think that's achievable? Bear in mind, they'll have to be built before they're installed, so really you need to ramp up production massively in the next 5 years.
Well, I mean, that's even... Let's maybe look at the overall picture. Let's say if we want to produce 10 million tons in Europe, that will take you around 80 to 100 gigawatts of electrolyzer, more or less. If we want to have another 10 coming from elsewhere, add another 100. But I assume other regions in the world also want to produce their hydrogen. So be in Australia, in India, in the US, we have heard during the last 2 days. So you also will need to be providing that capacity to other markets. So that's basically a big challenge. Now, recently we had some exchanges with the colleagues here in the panel and other companies, electrolyzer companies, and we were looking into what's feasible already in the very short term. And we saw that potentially the industry could put forward around 25 gigs of production capacity annually. as from 2025. So this could, I mean, if you will just consider this is available in 3 years' time and you have a constant utilization of those capacities, will be around over 100 gigawatts of available electrolyzers by 2030. Whether this electrolyzer will eventually be for the European market or elsewhere, I don't know. But there is definitely already an important message, which is the industry is ramping up, and they will have a lot of capacity available. So this is not going to be the main limiting factor.
You think renewables might be the limiting factor?
Renewables and the way you will account for these renewables. We have heard about this green certificate, green hydrogen certificate. Now we have in Europe a relatively different approach to how to define renewable hydrogen with additionality and temporal correlation. And this is going to be really defining the business case in all, and particularly the cost of renewable hydrogen. Because we talk about demand side targets, we talk about contracts for difference. Will this be an instrument? It's going to be a very good instrument. But this, remember, it has to break the gap between regular price and the price of renewable hydrogen. If you made your renewable hydrogen extremely expensive because of the requirements, then you need to fit in a lot more subsidies. So there will be a lot of pushback by governments, by industry, and so on. So we need to also find that the balance between the definition and the ambition.
I mean, I keep trying to draw us back because this is supposed to be an electrolyzer session. So let me bring in Dennis. You know, you're one of the biggest electrolyzer manufacturers in Europe, indeed in the world. Do you think the industry, can build enough electrolyzers fast enough to meet these targets? I mean, this is 20 million tons. The Green Hydrogen Organization now wants 100 million tons by 2030. I mean, we're talking crazy numbers, aren't we?
Yeah, indeed. So Min has presented 160 gigawatt to be installed or up running in 2030. Then we have the EU with 20 million tons, roughly 200 gigawatt. And if we take now the Green Hydrogen Organization target of 100 million tons by 2030, it would yield something like 1,000 gigawatts. So all mind-blowing, I have to say, because the current capacity in the market for the manufacture of electrolyzers is maybe estimated around about 2 to 3 gigawatt worldwide, no more. We are already having more than 1 gigawatt installed. We have the plans to go to 5 gigawatt and beyond by 25-26 as a first step. Competitors of us have also announced their plans. So we are investing ahead, but of course this investment ahead of the market is limited. We also need to see projects to be implemented. And there's maybe also around 3 gigawatt awarded, roughly estimated currently, and it's still a very long way. Let's take the lower number of Min of 160 gigawatt and only 7 to 8 years left. So we are running out of time. And there's obviously uncertainty in the market still. Green hydrogen is still more expensive than gray hydrogen. And investors need security for their investments. And I think especially these contracts for difference can solve part of this chicken-egg problem, because we can only lower also our costs for the electrolyzers if we have an order of scale, economy of scale. So both sides are waiting for each other, and we need to overcome this interlock. Therefore, the contracts for difference are a very smart solution. We introduced them in Germany. It's called the Foundation H2 Global. Now we are very happy that this is expanded to whole Europe. And it is actually a double auction on both sides, on the demand side and the supply side. The difference then is funded and covered by public funds. So we think this assures that there is no over-subsidizing. This is, I think, very important, also for the societies and the governments. And we also assure that there is a competitive condition for awarding these contracts. But definitely, all market players have to speed up, otherwise we will even not reach close to these target numbers that are all announced in the market.
Constantine, can I bring you in here? To build the numbers of electrolyzers we're talking about, you have to build factories, you have to get planning permission for factories, you have to build them, you have to get the raw materials in place, balance of plant, all these different things that need to happen. Nel actually has one of the most ambitious capacity expansion plans of all the electrolyzer companies. But can you go from 10 gigawatts to, 20, 30, 40 in the next few years? I mean, just from a practical perspective, is it physically possible?
Yes, it is. I mean, look, the gentleman from BNEF yesterday was talking about what it's actually going to take to get there, and it's really war-like conditions where we really need to, I mean, that's what, essentially kind of the situation that we're in today, the response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Repower EU. And I want to talk about that just a little bit, because you said we're moving away from the electrolyzer discussion. Yeah. But this is critical to the electrolyzer discussion, because our backlog of orders is at an all-time record high right now. And the reason those projects in our backlog aren't turning into purchase orders, why they're not going to FID, there are three reasons for that. One is financing, because the financing is all becoming clearer now. We're talking about contracts for difference. We're talking about ETS Innovation Fund for manufacturing facilities. That's part of the package that came out today. So there's the finance, and if the project developers don't have all the conditions and they're still waiting to see where's the money going to come from, they're still building the business case. So that's one. The second is permitting. It takes far too long to build a wind farm, particularly offshore, onshore even in some countries. Solar, less so a problem on permitting, but still big problem there. We need a lot more renewables to come onto the grid. The Commission's talked about raising the EU renewable target from 40 to 45% today. We would like to see it higher. So that's two, and the third is access to grid. This discussion that was raised by Marta about the Delegated Act. Just on that point, today in reality what's going on is that a lot of the projects that are developing are either direct connection projects, like the one that we have in Spain, which was inaugurated a couple of days ago. It's the largest project in Europe producing green hydrogen today, the Fertiberia project with Iberdrola. That's a 20 megawatt project. And then besides direct connection projects, they're projects developing in countries where the power mix is above 90% renewable, whether it's actually renewables, hydro. Look at Norway, look at Sweden, the south of Spain. So that's kind of the situation today. But going to your question, and kind of linking back to what Dennis was saying about scale capacities, the challenge moving forward is scale, speed, and size. Those are the three factors that are really important to us right now. So we need to scale up our manufacturing facilities. We need to do that really, really fast. We're running out of time. And the orders that are coming in are at gigawatt scale, so big size projects. We recently inaugurated a factory in the south of Norway. It's a 500 megawatt alkaline facility. It's the first fully automated factory in the world. So I had the chance to go and see it a couple of weeks ago. You have the robot arms on the production line, moving the cells from the pre-treatment to the chemical line, then to assembly. It's really impressive, and this is contributing to massive cost reductions. So you have economies of scale on the one hand. The more you build, the more you sell, the more revenue you have. Then you add automation to this and having good partners, and our target is to reduce our capex cost by 75%, taking all these factors into consideration. So in terms of the economies of scale, those factors, the R&D that we've done, the engineering, not just the R&D, we've done it, so we're confident that we can replicate that 500 megawatt production line and take it up to 2 gigawatts in the same factory or elsewhere. We're still looking at locations in Europe, in the US, in Asia. So yes, we can do it, but the conditions need to be there, they need to come fast.
And can I just ask, how long did it take to build that factory, 500 megawatts?
Just under 2 years.
Okay.
But that's, again, you're taking into consideration this automated
So that's
component.
new, so you can just replicate that. But in terms of getting permission to build a factory, finding sites,
The permitting
getting-
process itself in Norway was okay. It's a new facility, so it's greenfield. We didn't just move in. But I just want to emphasize this point on automation. To get this right, we're the first ones to do it. So you have to understand what the humans are doing on the production line at each phase of the production line. If you don't fully understand what everyone's doing, then you can't know what you want the robots to do. Now we're fully confident that we can replicate this model anywhere else in all the upscaling that we do. That in terms of the quality of the product, the efficiency of the output, it's never been better. Everything that comes out is the same.
okay. And you think the demand is there for gigawatts and gigawatts?
This is an interesting topic because we see it in the backlog and we see it in our project pipeline that the demand is there. But then when we talk policy, we go back to Renewable Energy Directive. We're talking about having targets for 50% renewable hydrogen consumption in industry or 2.5% in transport, and those have been pushed up by the Commission today, which is great. But then I talk to the steel guys, or I talk to aluminium producers, and I ask them, guys, are you going to help support us on this? And like, oh, sorry, we don't have a position on that. Or I see a little bit, an apprehension to fully commit to that. And we obviously benefit from having the certainty, having those mandates in place. And it is asking a lot of industry, but again, you look at the tools that are available. If you talk about carbon contracts for difference on the supply side, but on the demand side as well, this H2 global format, so you need to take the risk now. You need to take the risk now, first mover advantage. But again, devil's in the detail. If you go back to the Delegated Act, are these first mover projects being rewarded or not?
I mean, how much of, if we're going to scale up to hundreds of gigawatts of electrolysers, how much does that depend on the demand being there? A kind of a willingness to be a first mover, and with that, the risk that the next people along might be able to do it cheaper than you and undercut you, and just the willingness to try something new. I mean, if you produce green steel, it's probably going to be more expensive than steel today. Is that a problem? Is there a market for that? Min, can I ask you, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I guess, when we talk about decarbonization of hard-to-abate sector, they are called hard-to-abate for a reason, because they're not very susceptible to change. And let's take a case of the steel business. It's quite low-margin business. The majority of the steel in the world is produced in Asia, not in Europe, where we have a lot of mandates to push these things. Of course, the end user of the steel side can push a little bit in terms of green steel demand and things like that. But in order to start to use, let's say, hydrogen to decarbonize in other sectors and create this demand for electrolysers, for electrolysis, of course, then you need more of a global feel, right? Global mandate, and maybe eventually the supply chain can change a little bit based on where the location of, let's say, iron ore producers and things like that. But it does take a little bit of push, I guess, for this industry, and a lot of time we try to, maybe silos into a certain point of production, but we need to put these guys also into the conversation of, what it takes for them to start to use green hydrogen and things like that.
I mean, because we're talking hundreds of millions of, 20 million tons. That needs to be used. There needs to be a market for that. And that market needs to develop very quickly at massive scale. So it's one thing to say we're going to build this amount of electrolyzers, we're going to produce this amount of green hydrogen, but can it be sold? And if it can't be sold, the hydrogen won't be made.
Yeah, I guess another point that I want to make is, I guess I was listening to the panel this morning, and one of the point mentioned, of course, and I 100% agree, is maybe we need to think about tons per day, right? Because that is when industry, this hard-to-abate industry, is more likely to use this ammonia plant running 8,000 hours a year, steel plant always producing. You need to have that constant supply into the market, and that's where some of the challenge for green hydrogen will be. And let's say if we slowly ramping up into 20 million tons and so on, it should gradually happen for these guys to absorb, because just can't suddenly you have 20 million tons suddenly pop up in a few years and then everything has to be switched. Like, these are big industrial scale infrastructure has to be in place and kind of moving.
So which industries do you see the demand coming from? Like the most?
Yeah, that's
biggest
a very good question. So refineries starting to do certain things in terms of electrolyzers, but I was chatting to some of these refineries operators. They still need an SMR on site to kind of, having this yield to come out. You can't really bang on the demand for refineries always there, because let's say oil demand continue to decrease. For steel, there's a couple of plants being pop up. I think H2 Green Steel was there yesterday, having some contracts pre-signed. And then, then you're moving into marine side in Norway. Yara is pushing for this. Now CF industry is getting into, but it's not 100% commitment, right? It's just a couple of plants here and there and things like that. I guess one of the in the point of global, I don't want to take too much time, but in terms of global sense, actually Asia has been pushing a lot as well in terms of this volume. In Japan, JERA having that tender of 500,000 tons of low carbon ammonia to be used. So there's also that demand coming out in massive volume to use in coal thermal power plant, and that can potentially create that demand.
I don't know if anyone saw it, but there was a deal announced yesterday. Plug Power sold a 1 gigawatt electrolyzer, which is, as far as I can make out, the biggest ever done. And that's for hydrogen trucks, which I thought was interesting. Yeah. Okay. Does anyone else want to add to anything we've said? Daniel, Marta?
I have a quick reflection on your question about whether the industry is ready to upscale at the speed and so on. I mean, I fully agree that you need first a clear signal on demand. And today is probably a very uncertain moment, but in a few months we will have a much more different outlook, at least in Europe. And some things will start to clear. And CCFDs and other instruments will start to roll out, and there will be a clear plan on when the schemes are coming, how much are they supporting, so there will be this visibility for the industry. But I would like to probably take two examples from the solar sector and the wind sector. And if you go a few years back, 20 years back on the solar sector, 15 years, you will talk to anyone in the industry, they will never even imagine the speed at which they upscale production and manufacturing and how they reduce cost. They couldn't even envisage. And if you go to the wind sector, and back in 2015, we were discussing about the cost target for 2020 of offshore industry. We were discussing, is it 2020, is it 2030, we don't know. We reached it within 2 years. And if you look at the size of the turbine, they had nothing to do, and I think very, very few people could have project the speed at which the technology evolved. And this can happen also in many other sectors, in the semiconductor industry and so on. So I think we also, probably it's a bit hard to even reflect on at the speed this will change over time. But I'm confident that it will.
I mean, but we're going to have to ramp up the production of wind turbines and solar panels even faster if we're going to hit these kind of the scales we're talking about for green hydrogen. I mean, last year there was, I think, 225 gigawatts of wind and solar installed around the world. And just for Fortescue to reach its 15 million tons target will require 450 gigawatts of wind and solar. For the EU, for these targets, that's 600 gigawatts. So you're talking about trebling the current global installation annually, tripling that, in the next few years. Is that possible, Min?
Yeah, I guess, taking that numbers of the amount installed this year of 220, you got to subtract out the solar rooftop because, those using for electrolyzers a bit questionable. And then you think about what is the implication of tripling. Yes, maybe the supply chain can do it, but what is the implication here? We already see solar module price going up because of polysilicon shortage, silver price going up, maybe pandemic effect, but steel price going up, affecting turbines. So if, let's say, we keep banking on renewables, costs going down, to kind of support the green hydrogen, then you need to think a bit more about how do we support that, you know, pipeline of renewables to come out for the supply chain side of things, or else you go into this cycle of, you know, shortage for the supply side and then keep going up on the price for renewables as well.
So it's making me think, what is the biggest bottleneck for the electrolyzer industry? Is it policy? Is it renewables? Is it demand? Dennis?
It is off-take commitment by investors. So I have the feeling that investors are still waiting for us. There is no need to wait. So especially ThyssenKrupp Nucera, we are having 50 to 60 years of experience in the electrolysis sector with a track record of building large-scale plants. So we deliver what we promise. And actually, in order to invest and further expand our capacities is just off-take commitments. And by the way, Constantine, our manufacture is also automated, because without automation, we would not reach that level of accuracy and the quality and the longevity of our technology. It is quality proven and in place, so there is no need to wait for us. Yeah, we will follow the market quick. We can replicate our gigawatt factory. We can move it also to other regions of the world where it is required. We just need these off-take commitments.
Okay, I want to move it along because we've only got 15 minutes left, and I still want to give some time for audience questions if anyone has any. So let's talk about the technology side of things for a bit. There's obviously different types of electrolyzer. We talk about electrolyzers as if they're, you know, one thing, but they're quite different. Now, ThyssenKrupp uses alkaline. Nel does alkaline and PEM. Now, I just want to ask Constantine, why do both? Why would someone prefer alkaline for some projects and PEM for other projects?
Okay, so first of all, we don't have a massive ThyssenKrupp brand name behind us. We're a pure play hydrogen technology company. It's all we do. We build electrolyzers and we build refueling stations, hydrogen refueling stations as well. We have a long history in alkaline. We've been doing it since 1927. First uses go back to developing ammonia for fertilizers during the famine after the First World War in Norway. And then for PEM, I don't know if many people know this, but PEM electrolyzers were used to produce oxygen on submarines during the Second World War. So we've been doing alkaline since the 1920s, and we acquired the company that was doing the oxygen hydrogen production in the 1940s called Proton. We bought them 5-6 years ago. Why do we do that? Again, we're looking at all the different technologies. Today we have this manufacturing facility, alkaline, atmospheric alkaline in Norway, and we have our PEM in the US. So we are looking at other technologies too. That doesn't mean that we're not looking at solid oxide. We're not looking at pressurized alkaline. Pressurized alkaline can basically deliver the same what PEM does, just dynamic response. It responds to the intermittency of renewables. It's smaller in size as well. One of the differences, the main differences between alkaline and PEM is the size of the unit itself. It reduces dramatically, so you can actually fit a PEM electrolyzer on a submarine. You can't do that with an alkaline electrolyzer. But we are looking into pressurized alkaline. We're testing that in our facility in Nobotodden, which is where we were producing electrolyzers before. We've fully converted that for testing now. So we're testing pressurized alkaline, and we want that to be running next year, 2023. It can go straight into the Herøya plant in the south of Norway, or wherever we choose to build the next factory. So there is an element of hedging risk, because PEM's a bit of a bloodbath right now, if I can call it that. There's a lot of, there's Plug, there's McPhee, there's a lot of ITM,
yeah.
And there's Siemens too. So there's a lot of competition in PEM right now, and we need to be careful about something in the next couple of years. And you're all aware of this, but the price of rare earths is going up in a very large way. So the prices of iridium have gone through the roof. The prices of platinum, you use platinum and iridium in PEM, they're both very high right now. And that's an issue for PEM. In alkaline, we've managed to engineer around those issues. So we don't use any rare earths or any exotic materials in our water electrolyzers. And that's a big thing that's going for alkaline right now. And one of the reasons I would say that we're really looking at pressurized alkaline as well moving forward. Not to say that that PEM is,
I mean, PEM is more expensive, right? I was always told that PEM was more expensive.
The efficiency rate isn't at the same level.
Okay.
So in terms of output, you're not getting the same.
But PEM is better because it can ramp up quickly and ramp down quickly with the ups and downs of renewable energy. But if pressurized alkaline electrolyzers can do that at the same speed, why do PEM? I know. Well, you are doing PEM.
So we're doing those technologies. I told you we're looking into pressurized as well. I think Sunfire is doing pressurized alkaline as well. This is kind of the sector's still developing. Huh? Like, okay, we have that long history dating back to the 1920s in alkaline. That's why it's the most efficient electrolyzer technology out there. But SOEC, solid oxide, alkaline exchange membranes, anionic membranes, these are all new technologies. We don't know how quickly these will develop, how efficient they're going to be. We're still testing them. There could be a revolution tomorrow in some technology we don't know, or somebody might take something from the periodic table and build a new electrolyzer. So
yeah, there's new technologies coming out all the time. They contact me all the time. Yeah. I actually interviewed Andy Marsh, CEO of Plug Power, this morning. I asked him why PEM, and he said, well, if you think about the amount of KOH you'll need for alkaline electrolyzers and the amount of land you'll need to build these gigawatt scale plants, it's going to be difficult. And he didn't see iridium as a problem. He thought, they'd be able to source iridium in.
Yeah, I just want to support that point that Constantine made and kind of go back to that point about there's not enough KOH. If you look into iridium, there's not enough iridium in the world for that pipeline. Even 160, you're looking at 200 tons of iridium. Currently, the world produces about 8, right? So that's 26 times more. And in terms of platinum, also, if you to support that pipeline, is the entire demand of platinum in the world. And actually, it's kind of funny because when you look at the countries that's producing these rare earth metals, South Africa holding the biggest reserve. So if we think about energy security, and most of these rare earth metals in a few countries, the second country is actually Russia. So you then maybe fall back to the same problems of energy security, and maybe what the problems that actually the battery industry is facing now about lithium. That will kind of come for PEM at some point if a lot of PEM come in.
Dennis?
Yeah, I would like to add to this discussion for electrolyzer technologies. First statement is there will be a market for all the technologies because the demand outnumbers by far the capacity, and there's differences between these technologies. So we consider the alkaline water electrolysis most suitable for large-scale installations for production of commodity hydrogen. While the PEM is maybe more suitable for centralized, rather smaller installations, maybe in the tens of the megawatts, while the alkaline water electrolysis in the 100s of megawatts up to gigawatts. And quite interesting is also the SOEC technology because potentially it has got a low OPEX if it is combined with heat-consuming downstream processes.
Yeah, it's waste heat.
The problem is it's still in the development phase. So it will take, from our estimate, maybe another 8 to 10 years until it might be industrialized. So in the moment, I think the most suitable are alkaline water electrolysis for the large scale and PEM for the decentralized. We have chosen naturally alkaline water electrolysis because of our history, because we are in chlor-alkali. We built up this experience, have also optimized the entire system, and we see also in future, although PEM will still further develop, but we will also continue to innovate and further improve, that alkaline water electrolysis, CAPEX and OPEX wise, will stay ahead of PEM. That's our view. But we, of course, also observe the market, how it develops, and then we'll also take action in case we see that there's some difference. I have maybe also to correct here some, because it's often mixed up. There are no rare earths in electrolysis. It is, that's totally different sort of elements. It's platinum group metals, so iridium, ruthenium, platinum, and so on. And they are used actually in order to increase the efficiency or to lower the power consumption. And this is another advantage of the alkaline water electrolysis. It can be run completely without, but with the disadvantage that you will have a higher power consumption. That means a lower efficiency. You need more electrolyzers. You need more electrolysis surface. Therefore, have to utilize also more of the other material. And in PEM, we have, compared to our alkaline water electrolysis, about 5 to 6 times more of these PGMs, the platinum group metals, which makes them more expensive. But also, let's say, if you consume it and need it in that large amount, then also maybe a sourcing might be a problem in the future.
Another thing Andy Marsh said this morning was that they need to sort out recycling the iridium, so they don't have to dig up new iridium for every electrolyzer. So do you guys think that alkaline is a better prospect than PEM?
Yeah, for us, for Nucera, for sure. Because we do our own evaluations how the technologies might develop, and we see that from CAPEX and OPEX wise, alkaline water electrolysis will still stay ahead.
Okay.
They will improve for sure the PEM, no doubt. There's still a lot of R&D going on, but we will do as well.
Min, have you got an independent view on that?
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense in terms, and actually that's sort of the thing. So we see some of the contract, being signed before the 1 gigawatts contract with Plug, that most of the bigger contracts for bigger plants are alkaline and then smaller one for PEM. But I guess there's also, let's say if we do a thought study, maybe a future ahead, maybe that can also be combined in a same facility where you use alkaline to handle some sort of base load, and you have PEM added on top to take advantage of excess renewables in the grids and things like that. So there's a lot of possibility, and if you think about maybe there's not enough renewables going around for this electricity, for green hydrogen, then SOEC can come in with nuclear. There's a lot of possibility there. But as Dennis mentioned, that they need time to develop, and looking like we don't have time.
Yeah. Okay. Do we have any questions from the audience? Yes, sir. Okay, I'll keep this.
Hi, Kobard from Bloomberg NEF. Question for the two electrolyzer manufacturers. As we often point out, Chinese electrolyzers are about a quarter of the price of Western ones. Are you going to be able to catch up now soon?
So was the question about how quickly we're going to be able to catch up with the cost of a Chinese electrolyzer? Should I take that one first? So we had this conversation briefly earlier on. In our view, there's a reason why Chinese electrolyzers are cheaper right now. And if you take the balance of plant view, which Lee was talking about, and you were saying earlier, then my response to that is you buy what you pay for in terms of the materials that the Chinese are using and the equipment that goes around the cell stack in the whole process. So yeah, my response to that is you buy what you pay for. But having said that as well, I think the Chinese, they will catch up in the coming years in terms of increasing their efficiencies, because that's the main issue with Chinese electrolyzers in my view. The efficiency is just not at the same level as it is with us, but we need to be very mindful and do not underestimate them at our peril. They will catch up very quickly.
If I just can intervene, and I'm not a panelist, but we ran a story in Recharge recently which basically had the Chinese industry admitting that they can't actually compete with Western electrolysers on a levelized cost of hydrogen basis because of the inefficiency of the Chinese machines. So they may be cheaper. This is what our man in China came up with from a sort of private report that came out in Chinese. You've done a follow-up?
No,
Oh,
I'll
talk to you after.
Maybe I add before you do the follow-up.
Yeah.
So if we talk about cost, we have to talk about total cost of ownership, not just capex. Yeah, a low capex actually at the end might not serve your purposes. Because there are two different philosophies. One is to have a very low capex, but then also short living. The stacks have to be exchanged often, and it will add to your OPEX. And if you look on the cost of the hydrogen produced, the majority of it is OPEX. So it's dependent on the efficiency of the electrolysis and also the power cost. And there's the other field of high standard suppliers. We account ourselves in the sector, and we are looking for quality, we are looking for longevity, and for low OPEX, such that the customer at the end, over the entire life cycle of a plant, has the lowest cost. So we always have to talk about total cost of ownership. I know it's more difficult to sell than just the cheap first installation, but we think our customers won't be happy with it.
Okay, we're kind of out of time. Would everyone like to just sum up their thoughts on what we've discussed, or not?
Yeah, you can go first.
I can make a more general comment about this conference. It's very good for, I think, the three of us in particular who are sitting in Brussels and so-called bubble, to be at a conference like this and be surrounded with people that are coming from different parts of the world, because it really gives us that perspective of, okay, what's going on in the US, what's going on in Australia, what's going on in Asia. And it has been an eye-opener, and things are moving very, very fast. And we've said this at the Electrolyser Summit that we attended a couple of weeks ago: don't make the same mistakes we made with solar. The others are catching up very fast. We need to move quickly. This has been the theme of today's conference as well, is speed. No, just that's my general reflection about this assembly overall.
Do we have any more questions? No? All right, well, yeah, Marta.
Maybe if we can add something, speed is important, targets are important, getting there is important, but purpose is important as well. Why are we doing hydrogen? For what are we doing hydrogen? Hydrogen used to be a tool for the climate. It must be a tool for the climate. It cannot become a goal in itself. Let's not run after, an ideal of hydrogen. Let's produce hydrogen with renewable electricity so that we do not run into a new biofuels story. Let's make this hydrogen really green, really useful for the climate, and then let's use it where it's needed. Let's use it in those hard-to-abate sectors that do not have another way to use it. So I think maybe a general comment on the conference as well is, yes, we need hydrogen, and we need all of these great minds come together and think about how we do it, but the why. We shouldn't lose sight of the why. We're doing this because we have 30 years to decarbonize an entire economy. That's the why. Let's keep it in mind.
Yeah, and maybe just one thing to add on the back of that, and on the back of what Constantine said, is on the vibe of the conference is also quite Europe-centric. It makes sense, a lot of target for Europe, but we need to think about other regions as well. If we start to funnel every green hydrogen to this region, then the other region will end up, not meeting that target, not decarbonizing.
And we could have talked about Fortescue's 15 million ton target, for instance, which is global. I mean, that's not far off what the EU target is, so not that different. But that's it. Thank you very much.